Okay, so I'm just letting everyone come in. Welcome. Good morning. I promise this topic is not so gloom and doom. I feel like I've maybe labeled it in a way that it's sort of funny when you're producing these kinds of webinars. It's like, let's get into some of these cautionary tales, but then the title is always so depressing. So sorry about that. It's not going to be depressing, I promise. Okay, so I'm just setting up our chat. If you have any questions, you can put them in the chat or the Q&A. Welcome, everybody. Okay. All right, we're going to get started. So we record these and we put them on the YouTube channel too. So you can see all of the other webinars. We usually do them on Tuesday mornings. And if you can't come live, you can see them there. So we're going to get right to it. So this webinar is on 5 mistakes students make. So it's really about providing you with some cautionary tales and then some solutions to some of these areas. So in this webinar, I'm going to show you about common mistakes that students make, and we're going to talk about specific ways that you can action this. It might not actually take us to a half an hour. This is a shorter one, in my opinion, but I'm going to try to give you as many tools for your toolbox as possible. And if you do have questions about mistakes you feel like your student is making, you can throw them in the Q&A or the chat, and I'll be happy to kind of jump in and share some ideas with you. So if you just want to throw your attention over here or just listen in as you're multitasking this morning, that's great. So the first mistake that we see a lot of students making is acting on unpleasant feelings such as anxiety, boredom, or overwhelm with avoidance. So I'm producing a new podcast for Evolved Education, and we just taped our first initial episodes. And one of them was actually with a guy named Spencer Moravec, who works here at Evolved Education. And he and I actually discussed this in the episode. So once it comes up, I'll definitely make sure everyone on this webinar knows about it. I think it's one to listen to because I actually learned a lot in the conversation. And I think one of the things I'm really connecting in my practice is just that we all have these unpleasant feelings and kids are no different. And when we don't give kids a way to manage their energy levels or something to do in these moments of having these feelings, then they can avoid them, because when kids can do, they do. And when they don't, they're not doing it, it's usually because they don't have a tool or a strategy to do it. So what I find, for example, is that let's say you have a kid with a lot of anxiety, right? So we want to teach them that the way to handle that is that that's sort of an energy source, right? And as Spencer says in the webinar so eloquently, he says, it's a hot source and it's a pretty unhealthy source, but it is energy nonetheless. And so we can use that energy to kind of act and to go and do something that requires that level of energy. So like sometimes if I can't sleep at night, the kind of worst thing that you can do is just kind of lay there. If you're worried about something, it's better just to get up, maybe write down all the things that you have to do for that task, and then you'll perhaps feel more at peace because you've just kind of executed on the energy level, right? Actually, Spencer talked a lot about boredom in the episode, which was really interesting. He says that he looks for when kids kind of say, I'm bored, or they have a low connection or a low energy level towards something, because that's a really nice signal to teach into, to continue to press and look for areas of interest with a child. So if a kid comes to you and is like, this is so boring, great, this is energy. We can use this to continue to look for angles here that will really connect with your kid and kind of light you up, right? So we want to use the energy that our kids are coming to us with in a way that's going to promote them into learning and into productivity and into engagement, right? So like he tells a story about a kid who had to study a particular figure in history, and that the kid was really bored with all the things they were reading in school. He had seen it before, he picked it up really easily. And so he kept pressing and sort of researching and looking for an angle that had not been discovered before, and presented that to the student. And the student was really psyched and kind of became really lit up about it. And so I just want to encourage you, if you're kind of hearing from your kids that they're bored, you can say that's actually great. And instead of being like, oh, don't be bored, like So I mean, I'm guilty of this too, but I'm never bored or whatever you kind of go to, you can say, well, that's actually an energy level, and you can use it to inform you that what you're doing isn't connecting to you. So you need to actually find a way to connect to what you're doing. And that's the messaging we want to give the kids, right? Um, Overwhelm is another one that we get a lot. So, kids may just be feeling a sense of overwhelm. And we used to see this a lot more before COVID, when there was a lot of scheduled activities and kids would be overscheduled and they didn't have time to just kind of be at peace and get a brain break. But I would say it still kind of happens if there's a lot of tests or a lot of different types of schoolwork in a period. If you have a particularly busy weekend or busy spring, or you're outside a lot in the day in the summer and the kids are really exhausted, this is a sense of overwhelm. So again, what we can just do is name it with the kids and say, wow, it seems like you're really overwhelmed. What we do when we're overwhelmed is we actually cut down on the things that we're doing and we take a break, right? And so this is what we do with that feeling. So in the episode that I talked to Spencer about, we were just talking a little bit about, while we're managing these like unhealthy, or the more unhealthy energy streams that are going to come in, like life is 50-50, right? So you're going to have these feelings. It's not avoidable. It's not like we're intending to avoid them. But what we want to do is also build on the other side some healthy energy streams. So we want the kid to be able to come to work without having to use anxiety. You need me to come to this talk without needing a bunch of coffee, right? So we need to have other ways to have energy come into our lives. And this usually comes with some exploration with your kid around what kind of things are you really interested in? What right now, what are your favorites? What are some of the things that we can add into your day that will just fuel your energy in a really healthy way, as opposed to just having a reliance on some of these more unhealthy energies, if that makes sense. So let's go on to neglecting feedback. So when this is the second mistake we see a lot of students making. So neglecting feedback is a big one. So when students get feedback from teachers, when they get feedback from us, they can neglect it pretty easily. And I think that sometimes comes from the fact that we usually tell them the feedback and we don't really tell them what to do with it. We don't ask a lot of questions of kids. So I think a better way to handle feedback is to ask them how they could improve. How could you do this differently going forward? Put them really in the driver's seat in terms of having those kinds of solutions. I also teach my older students that they should be critical of feedback they get, meaning we don't just want to accept all of the teacher's comments and grades and feedback, especially if we don't agree with them or we don't understand them. And that's really their prerogative as a student to go back to a teacher and say, I see you marked me off for these different questions. I'm just wondering if you can explain this a little bit more to me so I understand. That's really great advocacy, and it's a great way for kids to engage in feedback that is critical. We also want kids to have a chance to amend and adjust and change their behaviors and really applaud those processes. I think standardized education, the systems that we have here, do not applaud this enough and truly kind of mark kids on their end products as opposed to how they move through the work. And if they're able to take feedback and adjust and turn course, that's what I'm interested in having kids do, because I know how successful they can be when they do this. So a third mistake would be overcompensating instead of learning a strategy or a tool. So I see this a lot in kids who have learning issues or who have, areas that are really challenging for them. And we want to have compensations. Compensations are actually very healthy and appropriate and very helpful, even as we're teaching tools. So like a simplest form of a compensation might be that your kid would skip over some reading words. It's called a miscue. So they'll be reading some words and then they'll sort of omit. So if I'm reading this sentence, I might say overcompensating instead learning a strategy or a tool. And I skipped of. Now, in my mind, I'm kind of getting most of the content. I'm getting most of it, but my real need is to develop perhaps my decoding skills, my fluency skills. And so if I ignore, as a teacher or as a parent, if I ignore what is challenging for a child in the actual academic learning process, then my student always compensates and doesn't learn the tool or strategy to do what they have to do. And sometimes compensating is very helpful and important because there's a lot that's required of a student and they need to compensate for some things while they're working on tools for another set of things. So for example, if let's say your child is going to OT, occupational therapy, to work on their hand grip for pencil grip, and let's say that it's appropriate right now for them to write 2 sentences on paper before their hand really gets tuckered out, you might compensate in that way and continue to either scribe for them or have them type or have them speak into some kind of speech to text to finish out their writing and ideas. That to me is a really nice way of explaining how a compensation can support the development while a child is actually learning a strategy or a tool. So it's not to say that compensations are not okay. We want to actually have compensation. Sometimes it's actually really appropriate to have them, but we just want to know what they are. And we want to replace them with strategies and tools a little by little, right? So that they can build their own ability to move into that. Like I sort of remember when one of my children was in 3rd grade and we were struggling with the reading process, and the teacher would say, well, actually he really gets the text. Like even though he's having trouble decoding, his comprehension is pretty strong because he's able to use the context of the story. He can use the pictures. He can use other stories that he's read to kind of help him understand this new story, like the schemas that we develop to help our understanding. So he was compensating for all of the decoding skills he did not have, and he understood the reading. And so to some people that might seem like, well, it's fine, right? He's on grade level. He's actually doing this okay. But actually what was happening was he was melting down on a daily basis because the energy to compensate in that way is a lot greater than, just being able to decode the words. So it's definitely more helpful for him to learn that strategy or skill, but he might need to have some compensation going on while he's learning that tool, if that makes sense, right? So then we have also, this is the 4th mistake. So students do not give themselves enough time. So I see this a lot in, long-term projects because the kid, I did a whole webinar on long-term projects, and you can see it in the YouTube channel if you want. It goes through this in more depth, but students get a lot of messaging when they're waiting till the last minute. They get that nice adrenaline energy rush, right? And that's helpful to get through the assignment. Or they just don't really know how to work through something over time, or they just think they just have one thing to do because it just says on the prompt, like, write the paper. And so to them, it's just, okay, on Monday night, I'm writing the paper. But really, there's about 10 different steps within that they have to do. And then they get overwhelmed and it becomes a really tricky night. I also see this mistake happening with standardized testing a lot. So if you have a kid who is preparing for a standardized test, you need to give your child at least 6 months of preparation time in a standardized test. And it's important to be thoughtful and strategic about that studying because you want to use that time very well. But a lot of times people are coming into our practice to apply for private schools, and they're coming in September and the test is in November. And that really doesn't give them enough time to learn all of the content that they need to learn. It's really important to start early. So we also wanted to say that to teach a child, sometimes and I talked about this in the other webinar of the series, but you have to really handhold your child sometimes through a long-term process so they can get a feeling and an experience with that. I know Becky's popping on. Hi, Becky. I'll catch you up in a minute. I'm just finishing the mistakes. Okay. So working without understanding one's brain is the last mistake that we see kids making. And so we have a solution now for this in our company, which I'm really excited to announce with this webinar. So we're partnering with an assessment that Becky and I have been working on bringing into the company, which is called the Mind Print Assessment. And what it does is it's an hour-long assessment with your child, and it marks them on verbal, visual, processing, and executive functioning. And you learn sort of what to lean into and what to boost and how best to work. It is a screening norm reference test that we now provide here. And actually for all of our test prep students, we're having this as part of their initial 2 sessions where we do this and then we do a mock test to really give us all of that good information on how a student works so we can really utilize that time as well as possible. However, I want to also just say that we have a couple of different boot camps going on as well, which could help as your student. One of them is the learning, and then we have the executive functioning boot camps, which are really going to start off with the assessment and then provide your child with actual tools that they can build on and transfer into their lives as students in their own way. So whatever they need to go through this process as well as possible. Collaborative, and if you have a neuropsych report, that's sort of the next step into the screening would be the first step. And if there's a learning, it does not diagnose anything. So it's not a diagnostic tool for any learning issue. But if you do see something that is important to dig more into, you would have a neuropsych. If your child has a neuropsych, they don't really need a mind print assessment because everything in the neuropsych would be really doubling up on that. So we would just take that as the measure of information and enact one of these boot camps, right? So I'm going to give Becky a minute to tell you about the collaborative and proactive solutions. I'm throwing her into the hot seat, but one of the other kind of things that I know for sure, so I'll just kind of go backwards. I'm just going to do a quick overview of the mistakes that I covered today. Becky, I'd love for you just to tell a little bit to everyone about how this approach could help a parent to understand if these mistakes are happening for their child and what to do about it if they wanted to engage in a conversation around it. So for example, this is the first mistake, acting on unpleasant feelings without with avoidance, instead of having that just be understood as an energy level and having some tools, neglecting feedback from teachers, overcompensating instead of using a learning tool or strategy. Students don't give themselves enough time. And then of course they don't always understand their own brain, which we understand is tricky to do. It's tricky to get an understanding of your own brain in your own brain.
Yeah.
So,
For an adult.
yeah, right. So I think to me, the information is key. And as a parent of a school age child, I think it's such a gift to be able to understand my child's brain, but it's also such a gift to empower myself with tools that I can use in my own toolbox as a parent to continue to be curious and to problem solve with my child as mistakes happen, right? So could you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so I think collaborative and proactive solution is a non-punitive, non-adversarial approach to problem solving with your child. And it really engages the kid in solving the problems that are affecting his or her own life. And what I think fits into this discussion really well is that instead of seeing kids as manipulative or lazy or and maladaptive behaviors, we're really looking at a list of lagging skills and understanding that because a child is lacking in a certain area, like difficulty handling transitions, difficulty appreciating somebody else's perspective, difficulty I'm just trying to think of a couple on the list. Difficulty seeing grays, like they only think in black and white. They're very, very literal, right? So a lot of these lagging skills, there's a breakdown because a kid has a lagging skill. And in the collaborative and proactive solutions model, we are looking at this list of lagging skills and we're checking off all the lagging skills that our kid has. And then we're creating a list of unsolved problems that are based on those lagging skills and unmet expectations. So we're really not focusing on behavior at all. And the beauty of this specific conversation, it's called Plan B, that we have in this model, is the first step is called the empathy step, and it really is just that. And it's really understanding from the kid's perspective what's coming up for them for any given unsolved problem. So you can also relate that to any given lagging skill, right? And so if you're understanding from the kid's perspective what's making it hard for them to remember to turn in their math assignment or to go back and reread their work or to incorporate teachers' feedback into their writing or something like that, it really opens the door not only for the kid actually learning about themselves, because they can actually articulate what's going on for them, but also the parent to understand like how they can then move forward and support their child the best way possible. And the whole conversation is very objective. It's, again, like we're not focusing on behavior at all. It really gives you a good insight into what's going on for the kid. And it's not directly teaching skills, but through years of practice and having these types of conversations, kids are learning how to understand their own perspective, take somebody else's perspective, because at a certain point in the conversation, the adults also get to share what their concerns are for whatever the unsolved problem is. And so the kid then takes the other person's perspective, and there is a lot of learning going on, though it's less direct learning than probably what we're used to.
Right. And that's what I love about it, is that, like, when we have kids that make mistakes, like any number of these mistakes, right? We can certainly like move forward pretty quickly, and let's just say we assume that this is the mistake, right? That, oh, my kid didn't give themselves enough time for this long-term project, but maybe there was something else going on. Maybe they didn't this happens actually all the time, where a child has to access like Noodle tools, or they have to go into something in the virtual landscape of learning, and they don't know how to do it. And so they just sort of like avoid and delay and they don't do it. And so if we just come in and say, well, I know you didn't complete that assignment because you don't know how to work overtime, and then we come in and teach them how to use their time, we're missing the point entirely, right? Exactly. So it's better to kind of start off with actually using what Becky's talking about and saying, hey, I noticed you were working really late last night on your English paper. What's up? What was that about? Why did you wait till that time? And give the child ample time. It feels really awkward because we're so not used to asking our kids questions and giving them the time and the prompting to truly understand. And if they're new to this, they might also just give you the answer that they think you want to hear. So again, you want to be trained in this because you want to know what their experience is like, so that you can help them to address that area that they needed to. So going back, if you actually go through this and then you learn, oh, they didn't know how to sign on to Noodle tools. Okay, great. We now understand the problem. Let's now come up with a solution. I was just listening to Brene Brown, actually. I'm like totally sucked into her books and learning and stuff. And she talked a lot about how her organization spends hours defining problems. Like, they don't go to solutions very quickly. They really spend so much time understanding the actual problem that they're trying to solve. And I think that's really kind of a missed process for a lot of school age kids. Like, they never really get that opportunity to understand like what is really at play, right? A lot of these mistakes would be solved if we understood the child's brain, and if we also give the child ample time to describe and articulate their experience, which they sometimes also need help with, right?
I also think that, part of this is that the kid really gets the first opportunity to come up with a solution and we evaluate it based on it being realistic and mutually satisfactory for both sides, right? For both parties, whether it be a parent and a kid, a teacher and a kid, whatever it is. And I also think that kids are so used to what we call in CPS as plan A, which is the adult just coming up with a solution and imposing it and just telling them what to do, that they actually don't know how to come up with solutions, which is a really important life skill. You can't be an adult at working and not be able to come up with some type of solution for a problem, right? Whether it's a problem you have on your own or on a team. And so, the model, you get a really good understanding of what's coming up for your kid. You share your perspective, but then your kid also has an opportunity to practice thinking about solutions and what is a realistic solution and what actually will work, right? Like for me and the adult that I'm working with right now. And I think that, like you said, like problem solving is a really skipped over skill. And so is solution making, because adults are used to just telling their kids what they should do.
It's funny that you say that, because I was just like, I think we go back to our like, I'm trained in this model. So like, I know how to use it and my husband knows how to use it. And we just revert back to plan A so quickly and easily, almost without thinking. And it's almost like, as soon as I see then the unsolved problem staying in its place, like, we have chores for the kids to do, right? And of course they just didn't do them for like the longest time. We're constantly being like, don't forget to take out the trash, don't forget to take out the trash, hello, take out the trash. It's like, okay, this is so plan A. Like, that's he's just ignoring me, right? So when we do that, right? Yeah, exactly. Like, okay, bye. Like, it's so easy to ignore that, right? Versus, hey, I know your job is to take out the trash. Like, can you tell me when that's happening? Can we write that down so I just know when it's happening? Or, why isn't the trash getting taken out? Like, what's happening with that, right? Why are you struggling to take out the trash? And coming up with an understanding of why that is. And something I also learned is, like, sometimes kids just tell you the reason, and like, you as an adult, this was the funniest moment for me and Becky when she was training me. But like, I'm like, but what if they come up with a solution that is like a lie? It's not really true. It doesn't matter, because it's their own, like, then they have to act on it. They have to act on their solution. They're in it. So in some ways they might arrive back to you and be like, actually, that wasn't really the case. But in some ways you just have to kind of like, I mean, Becky, correct me if I'm wrong, but like, I think it's a little bit tricky, but you have to kind of also trust that your kid is going to like eventually get into some of this learning. And the more you do it and the more supported you are in doing it, because again, we didn't grow up this way, and we don't really have that in our own parenting skill set, I don't think. So
No.
yeah. Yeah.
No, it's definitely work in progress. And yes, your kid, the first time you have this conversation, you might be like, this is BS. I mean, Mary did, right? And I had to be like, you have to just believe
I was
him.
like, this is so woo-woo. I don't know. Yeah.
And sometimes it is, but it's also because the kid's a little scared, because they're not used to their adult in their life really, really listening to them.
Yeah.
And really giving them the space to share. And a lot of the times that just come, like Mary said, you come back to it and you say, like, the solution didn't work, let's talk about it more. And then they actually give you the real reason. And sometimes what they're telling you is actually the real reason, and you just had literally no idea. So it sounds ridiculous to you. I mean, I remember this happened with you when we were going through this, and you and your husband both were like, that's not it. And I was like, just believe him. Let's see if the solution works. If it doesn't work, then we know it wasn't it. If it works, then that really was it.
Yeah.
And I think
it actually was it. Yeah. We just didn't believe it, but it was fine.
Yeah.
I mean,
so, there's also a little bit of adults, and I don't want to just say parents, right? Because teachers and administrators and tutors and whoever is working with kids, adults need to trust that the kid knows what's coming up for them, whether they can fully articulate it or not. But the more you have these types of conversations and you really open the door, like I said, indirectly, they're going to learn how to reflect on their own process. And that's actually how they learn about their brain, right? They actually have to dig a little bit deep and kind of think about, well, what really was coming up for me when I didn't turn in my writing assignment.
Right. Exactly. 100%. So, well, thank you, Becky. I appreciate you. always learning from you. Okay. So we're going to close out this webinar. Please join us. We're switching over to May, and in the month of May, we're describing and talking about writing. It's going to be 4 Tuesday morning talks on different areas of writing, from very young children all the way through college level writing will be applicable. So we're going to be talking about SRSD writing, writing revolution, and Samantha Chow is going to come in and talk to us about early childhood literacy. So I'm really excited for the next month's topic, and I hope to see you there. We're going to move the time to 9 to 9:30 because we have to do that to make sure all of our speakers can be here during the time. If you can't make it live, you can see all of our recorded webinars on our YouTube channel, and you could search that up with my name, Mary Neely, if you can't find it. But you should be able to do that pretty easily. And thanks so much for joining us this morning. Have a wonderful Tuesday.
Thank you.
You're welcome.